Greetings again, and we're in Chapter 8. We'll be using the same method as we did the last chapter and simply going through the objectives using this program. The first learning objective talks about the elements normally that must exist when a person is going to be held liable for a crime. And this is our that a performance of a prohibited act and a specified state of mind. All criminal statutes prohibit certain acts, and most of the acts are acts of commission. In other words, you actually do something, but sometimes they could be omission. Attempting a criminal act may also be a crime. For example, if certain steps toward the criminal objective are taken, elements of this requisite state of mind would vary with that fact. For larceny, for example, if you're taking someone's property, the state of mind would say, okay, I know it's someone else's property, and I intend to deprive him of it. And I intend to deprive him of that property. And of course, states of mind varying as you think about mental illness and the degrees of how severe some can be. And of course, the punishment would vary accordingly. The 5 categories of crime would be your second element. We have violent crimes, and of course, when you think of violence, you think of sexual assault, murder. Robbery is included here also, and even though robbery involves a property crime, which is your second one here, the reason it's included here as well would be because a person, when they're robbed, they're robbed with a gunpoint or knife or whatever, so there's fear in that person. The second one would be property crime, and of course this one is it's the most common of the crimes, and the goal of the offender, of course, is some form of economic gain or damaging to property. It could include robbery and burglary, which would be unlawful entry, and larceny, which is simply stealing. The third one is public order crimes, and this would include prostitution, gambling, illegal drug use, public drunkenness, and so forth. White-collar crimes is the next one. We, as a business, and we think about a person committing a crime. It could be an individual, it could be the company overall, the business overall. But you're thinking about embezzlement, bribery, bankruptcy, fraud, theft of trade secrets, insider trading, that type of crime. Again, it's in the business setting. And the last one is going to be organized crime. And whereas white-collar crime takes place with a legitimate business, organized crimes would take place as a business that's not legitimate. For example, prostitution, gambling, counterfeiting, drugs, and so forth, selling of drugs. The defenses that you could raise to avoid liability for a criminal act. The first one is that they talk about is justifiable force, and of course that's simply self-defense. Be real careful with that. Know the difference between deadly and non-deadly force. As an example, if you have an intruder and you shoot him in the back as he's trying to run away, you probably find yourself in trouble. The next one is called necessity, and that's where the offender is going to be relieved of liability because his act was done to prevent one that would cause greater danger. The next one is insanity, and of course this one, the person is not mentally capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong, or of what he did with that act, and of course in that case he would end up in an institution. The next one is a mistake, and this is not ignorance of the law. This one simply means it's a mistake. The example the text gives is one where a person picks up a piece of luggage and walks off with it thinking it's own. So that would be a mistake of fact. The next one is duress. Duress is where a person breaks the law because he's afraid not to. So, for example, he's being threatened, his family's being threatened or whatever, go and rob that bank, or if you don't, we'll go in and your children could be murdered or whatever. Entrapment is where the police or legal law officials actually suggest and then induce a person to commit a crime. And the purpose of this law would be, of this exclusion for liability, would be that it's prevent the police from pushing an individual into committing a crime that they would normally not commit. The next one is statute of limitations. There is a time limit for most crimes. There's not for murder, but others there are. And it simply means that within a reasonable length of time, whether it be 2 years or 5 years or whatever it is, that if you're going to be charged, then you've got to be charged. And the reason for that is, and if they don't, then you simply can't be held responsible anymore under law. And the reason for it, of course, is that if you wait too long, the authorities wait too long, the witnesses are gone, people forget, and so forth. And the last one is immunity, and this is where a person actually gives up the right of self-incrimination with the promise of not being charged with a crime himself, and so he usually turns witness against those others that were included in the crime itself. Number 4, the constitutional safeguards. Well, several of the amendments do that. The Fourth Amendment requires a search warrant for the police to come in and go through your property. The Fifth Amendment provides for due process. There's certain criminal procedures that have to be followed fair and orderly. You have the opportunity to object. You have the opportunity to confront your accuser, to provide your own witness, and so forth. This one also includes double jeopardy, which means you cannot be charged for the same crime twice. And then the last one under this section would be self-incrimination. You hear that all the time. They take the Fifth Amendment, so you cannot be forced to testify against yourself. And there's others, depending on the amendment, but you would be aware then the right to a speedy trial, the right to counsel, the right to know what you're being charged with, the right to reasonable bail, and of course a Miranda rule. And finally, how has the Internet expanded opportunities for identity theft? Well, you'd have to have your head in the sand not to know this one, but this covers everything from hacking to phishing to identity theft. It's a whole new world out there, and most of you know the reality of what happens if your personal information is being stolen and what it costs and the stress and so forth of trying to get it back. And simply imagine your medical records being made public, your financial record, your social security number, and so forth. And unfortunately, this has become a fact of life, so it's something that we have to be very careful of when we're online. So folks, that's going to be the objectives for this chapter, and again, wish you well, and questions or whatever, feel free to give me a call or email me.